Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. This podcast of the People's Pharmacy is brought to you by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools. They create healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. Learn more about toilet posture and health at squattypotty.com. That's SQUATTYPOTTY.com.
The New York Attorney General's office has accused retailers of selling fraudulent supplements. What's the real story? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Tests conducted on popular herbal supplements such as ginkgo biloba, echinacea, and valerian reportedly showed them to have no detectable herbs. Large retailers like GNC, Walmart, Target, and Walgreens were sent cease and desist letters demanding they not sell adulterated or mislabeled dietary supplements.
We'll talk with two experts on supplement quality to find out whether the tests conducted were appropriate. We'll also explore research on herbal and food therapies.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, the health news that matters to you with your calls and questions.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, people who eat primarily plant-based diets with some seafood cut their risk of colorectal cancer dramatically by 43%. That's the finding from the Adventist Health Study that included more than 77,000 Seventh-day Adventists. Eating meat, smoking, and drinking alcohol is discouraged by the religion, and about half of the participants ate no meat. Some were vegan, while others included eggs and dairy or fish in their plant-based regimens. The average follow-up in the study was just over 7 years, with 490 cases of colon or rectal cancer detected during that time. Vegetarians were 22% less likely to be diagnosed with colorectal cancer than meat eaters. Those who regularly included eggs and dairy but no fish still had an 18% lower risk. This observational study couldn't establish cause and effect, but it does look like a strong argument to eat more vegetables and cut back on meat.
A Mediterranean diet rich in vegetables, nuts, and seafood, and low in red meat and dairy products has been shown to provide several health benefits. But what about people who don't live near the Mediterranean or have olive trees in their backyards? A Swedish study shows that the Mediterranean diet can be modified to use local foods and still help people lose weight and lower risk factors for heart disease. This controlled study randomized 225 overweight Swedes to follow the modified Mediterranean diet or to be on a waiting list for 12 weeks. Instead of olive oil, the volunteers used canola or walnut oil. People were encouraged to eat walnuts, which were supplied, and were limited to 2 small desserts a day. In 3 months, those assigned to the diet lost about 11 pounds and 2 inches from their waistlines. Those on the waiting list lost about 1 pound during this time. 3/4 of the volunteers stuck to the diet for 3 months, and about half of them held on to it for the entire year. At the end of the year, they still weighed 9 pounds less than when they started. This suggests that a modified Mediterranean diet can help people lose weight and lower cholesterol and triglycerides.
The stop-smoking drug Chantix has been widely advertised on television. It encourages people to ask their doctor if Chantix is right for them. But this week, the Food and Drug Administration issued a new safety announcement about Chantix. In it, the agency warns that the medication can change the way people react to alcohol. There are reports of aggressive or violent behavior associated with this combination. Some people have amnesia for their actions. In addition, the FDA warns that Chantix can trigger seizures, even in some people who have no history of epilepsy. As important as it is to quit smoking, and it is, some people cannot tolerate the side effects of Chantix.
Dogs have an extraordinary sense of smell. Now scientists are finding ways to put this ability to discriminate between aromas to work detecting cancer. Research has suggested that dogs may be able to detect bladder cancer, melanoma, ovarian tumors, and cancers of the lung, breast, or prostate. Now, investigators at the University of Arkansas have trained Frankie, the rescue dog, to identify urine samples of people with thyroid cancer. Frankie, a German Shepherd mix, was trained to turn his head away from a sample that came from a patient with benign thyroid disease. He learned to lie down when presented a sample from a person with thyroid cancer. In a test, Frankie correctly identified 30 out of 34 samples, an 88% accuracy. The researchers suggest that using a trained dog like Frankie could help them rule out cancer when a person has benign nodules. It would also be helpful in detecting a recurrence in people who've been treated for cancer.
Glioblastoma is a type of brain cancer that's extremely hard to treat. People diagnosed with this condition usually survive for little more than a year. But a new treatment developed at Duke Cancer Institute suggests that a tetanus shot booster may improve the benefits from a vaccine therapy. The tetanus shot booster seems to prime the immune system and make it more responsive to immunotherapy. In the pilot study, half the patients who got the tetanus shot survived from 51 to 101 months. Those in the control group had a median survival of not quite a year. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist.
And I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist. Several weeks ago, the New York State Attorney General's office announced the results of its investigation into herbal supplements. Major retailers like Walmart, Walgreens, GNC, and Target were accused of selling fraudulent and possibly dangerous herbal products.
Since that announcement, there's been a firestorm of controversy. Questions have been raised about the quality of herbs and other dietary supplements. Where is the FDA when it comes to monitoring such products? Were the tests that were conducted done correctly? How can consumers trust the vitamins, minerals, and other supplements they find in pharmacies and health food stores?
To help us answer those questions, we turn to Dr. Todd Cooperman. He's the physician and the founder and president of ConsumerLab.com, an organization that provides independent test results, reviews, ratings, and comparisons of vitamins, supplements, herbs, and nutrition products.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Todd Cooperman.
Hi, Terry and Joe. How are you?
We're doing well. It's nice to have you back on the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Cooperman. There was a lot of controversy a couple of weeks ago. That's because the New York Attorney General's office did some investigation into herbal supplements. Headlines all across the country, evening news reports that herbs don't have what they're supposed to have in them. And you've been doing this work for what, 10 years? It seems like a very long time.
15 now.
15 years. Wow. Tell us a little bit about your background and what is ConsumerLab.com and why you are the most appropriate person to talk about this controversy.
Yeah. So, Joe, 16 years ago, I'm an MD, and I started Consumer Lab pulling Dr. William Obermeyer from the FDA, who was testing supplements there, to evaluate the quality of all kinds of dietary supplements because it's not being done by the FDA. Companies can put products on the market without any FDA approval or testing, and even the testing by the companies themselves is not very rigorous in many cases. So it's kind of a black box for the consumer. So for 16 years now, Consumer Lab has been testing thousands of supplements and reporting those on our website for our members. So we have over 70,000 individuals and others who get that information online.
Now, Dr. Cooperman, the report from the New York Attorney General's office was that these supplements that are sold in major chains were tested with something called DNA barcoding. Was this the right test to use for the products that were being tested?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is not. The Attorney General was digging in the right place, but really digging with the wrong tools. There are plenty of problems with herbal supplements to be found. We are reporting on them all the time. We just put out a report on aloe supplements. Half of them didn't really contain the aloe they claimed. We've put this kind of information out all the time. However, when you look at herbal extracts, there are two types of herbs really sold. There are those made from the whole plant part, say a root or a leaf, where it's kind of a ground-up powder, And then there are extracts where you are extracting certain key plant chemicals from those herbs. In the latter case with the extracts, you're not necessarily getting DNA in the extract. So a DNA-based test, which is what the Attorney General did, unfortunately is not the right test. And we know that the majority of the products that they tested were extracts. So they were, I don't know why, but they were using the wrong tools. The way to test for extracts is to do chemical analyses where you're looking for the right profile of these phytochemicals and making sure that they appear in the right ratios.
So, Dr. Cooperman, you're pointing out that you have discovered over the last 16 years a lot of problems with dietary supplements, vitamins, minerals, and herbs, that some of the products are not up to snuff. Mm-hmm. But you basically disagree with the New York Attorney General's office because what they did is they said, well, there's nothing here. We did this DNA barcoding, and it shows no ingredient, no active ingredient in these extracts. And you're saying, not so fast.
Right. I mean, there could be problems with some of these products, but you wouldn't know from a DNA barcode. If you get a negative finding with a DNA test in an extract, it doesn't mean it's a bad product. It just means there was no DNA. But again, you're not expecting DNA in these products. When you make an extract, the DNA may be left out. The DNA may be changed so that it's not recognizable. You need to be looking for these plant chemicals. So I think it was an ill-advised test, although, again, there certainly are issues, with many different types of herbal products. We actually have tested some of the products that they analyzed in that review by the Attorney General, and we have found actually many of them to be fine from a chemical perspective. Again, we weren't looking for DNA because there's no need to look for DNA in extracts.
What does the FDA do when there's a report that some product in the dietary supplement arena is not up to snuff?
Often nothing. The FDA will only react when it's kind of a life or death situation. So in this case, I'm not sure if the FDA is doing much. We've been reporting on problems for years. We know the FDA is getting our information, but they're really not reacting if they find that a product has a little less or even a lot less or none of the active ingredient. If people are, reporting serious adverse events, deaths, obviously, that's when the FDA jumps in.
I don't think most Americans realize that there is no oversight when it comes to dietary supplements or even vitamins for that matter. So how big a problem is this? And what should people do? And we know that you do have a website and you do have an active research program. So other than the, shall we call it the self-serving recommendation, go to consumerlab.com, I mean, what can people do when it comes to buying vitamins, minerals, herbs, or dietary supplements?
Well, obviously, there are a number of steps you can take even before you even buy the product. You want to make sure that there's evidence that it actually can help. Make sure that there's no evidence that it will hurt you or interfere with medications that you're taking. And there's a lot of good free information. The government has a website as well on about supplements, about giving this general background information. I often recommend that you avoid products that don't focus on a single product. These proprietary blends you want to stay away from where, they're offering kind of the kitchen sink of herbal ingredients, because the more herbs that are in there, the more likely it is that there's going to be a problem, often from just contamination. Years ago we tested, I remember, a woman's multivitamin from a major brand, and it was heavily contaminated with lead. And it wasn't because of the vitamins and minerals, but they had put in all kinds of other herbs in there, and at least one of them was contaminated. So it's always advisable to go with the ingredient that is important to you, and focus on that, and also do your homework. Make sure if it's an herb that it's standardized, if it's an extract, standardized to contain the right amount of the key phytochemical that you're looking for, that it's made from the right part of the plant as well. If it's a valerian root, you don't want to buy something that just says valerian or valerian leaf. So you need to do a little bit of homework. Then you do get to the point where it is a black box. You don't really know what's in there. The companies themselves are required to do testing under what's called the GMPs, which have been required for the last few years by the FDA, good manufacturing practices. But those GMPs don't specify what kind of tests are supposed to be done. They don't specify what the testing criteria is. For example, or are. If there's a lead contamination, how much lead is too much in a supplement. That decision is being left to the manufacturers. We at Consumer Lab use very strict standards. For example, the state of California is the only state to have a limit on lead. Even the FDA doesn't have a limit on lead in supplements. So we use that very strict standard and apply it when we're testing supplements.
So summing up that New York Attorney General's Office report, what should we make of that, and how should we proceed?
They did also identify, using this DNA barcoding, some other ingredients that were not expected in these products, rice and I think soy. But it's, again, the problem with this test, this DNA barcode test, is it doesn't tell you how much is in there, and it's not unusual and it's not unacceptable for a little bit of something to float over into a field, and you might get a speck of something and get the DNA from that in an herb. We don't know how serious that is, but if you look at the DNA, if the report from the New York Attorney General, and the New York Times did a very good summary of it. You can find all the test results actually online on their website, and you will see which other ingredients were found in there. If you have allergies to some of those things or sensitivity, take a look, be a little concerned, but it's hard to say how concerned to be because we don't know how much of those other ingredients were in there.
Dr. Todd Cooperman, thanks so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It's always my pleasure. Thanks.
You've been listening to Dr. Todd Cooperman. He's founder and president of ConsumerLab.com, an organization that tests the quality of supplements on the American market. The website, ConsumerLab.com, there's a link from our website.
And we'd like to hear from you. Have you tried using an herbal medication or a dietary supplement for a health problem? What was it, and how well did it work? You can call the number to join our conversation. It's 888-472-3366. You can send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or send us a message by way of Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Again, to join the conversation, give us a call at 888-472-3366.
Just because the Attorney General's testing methods were not perhaps perfect or even very good doesn't mean that we're home free. In fact, Terry, about 2 years ago, there was a report in the journal JAMA Internal Medicine with regard to vitamin D3. Researchers in Portland, Oregon purchased 55 bottles of D3 from 12 different suppliers. The doses ranged from 1,000 to 10,000 international units per pill. The scientists had them analyzed and discovered amazing discrepancies. Some pills only 9% of the labeled dose. Others actually had 140%. And even when the pills were from the same lot, they could vary from 57 to 138%, suggesting that the quality control was terrible. So if you're taking vitamin D, or vitamin D3 in particular, how do you know?
And of course, that holds up for all kinds of other supplements, in particular herbs.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll find out how Australia manages quality control, and we'll take your calls at 888-472-3366. You can also email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
You're listening to the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's the People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Redex Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that moisturize deeply to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334, today's show number 985, or find it on the web at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're talking about the health headlines that matter to you, and we invite you to join the conversation at 888-472-3366. What's been your experience with dietary supplements? You can also email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or get in touch through Twitter. We are at People's Pharmacy. That number to call, again, it's 888-472-3366.
To find out how other countries handle dietary supplements, we turn to Dr. Russell Setright. He's a medical herbalist, a naturopath, an acupuncturist, and an educator in advanced life support, first aid, emergency care, and rescue. He's consulted with Blackmores Limited, an Australian producer of herbal supplements.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Russell Setright.
My pleasure, and good to speak to you again, Joe and Terry.
It's wonderful to speak with you in Australia. Dr. Setright, you are probably Australia's leading herbal expert and understand the testing of herbs and the quality of herbs and the use of herbs better than almost anyone else. And we are facing a huge scandal here in the United States. A few weeks back, the New York State Attorney General's office did some testing, or at least requested testing from a so-called expert here, and found that popular brands of herbs sold in our prominent retail stores like GNC, Target, Walgreens, and Walmart, these are huge chains, they had products that apparently were not up to snuff, and that's probably the nicest thing that we can say. In fact, 4 out of the 5 products that were tested did not include any of the herbs listed on their labels. At least that's what the Attorney General's office said. We'd like to get your perspective on the testing of herbs to find out if they have what they are supposed to have, whether there are impurities. This process that was done here is called DNA barcoding technology. Your thoughts, please.
Well, it's certainly very interesting, and there's no doubt that DNA barcoding is very, very accurate for identifying a herb or a product which has DNA. But we have to look at, are we actually testing products that have DNA present? Now, as we know, let's look at one of the most common ones, and one of the ones that also, I believe, caused a lot of controversy in the United States, and that's the herb ginkgo biloba, or commonly called ginkgo. Now, that is a highly purified herb, and being highly purified, there's a good evidence that there may not be any of the DNA strains left in the final product. You know, I think probably if we wanted to test vodka for the DNA strains of the potato, we might be struggling. And I think it's almost got to the stage of some of these purifications in herbs, and in Australia they're known as herbal drugs because they come under a different standard. Rather than being a food supplement, they are in fact a medicine under the therapeutic goods, which is similar to your FDA. Now, you also have some of the people in the USA, for instance, Professor Cohen from the Harvard Medical School. Now, he's not really a supporter of the supplement industry, but he, again, is a supporter of science, and he doesn't believe that DNA barcoding is probably the way to test many of these highly purified herbs. And in fact, when you make decoctions and distilling and all sorts of processes these herbs go through, then there's a good chance that many of them don't have any of the original DNA from that herb that we looked at. But on the other hand, there could be DNA samples from parts of the fillers, like rice and soy and so on, that are quite often put in the fillers of tablets. So if we just relied on a DNA barcoding, what we could end up with is a product that contains soy and no ginkgo, where in fact it did contain the constituents of ginkgo that have been used in the scientific validation of efficacy, And that wouldn't show up in the barcoding, or may not show up in the barcoding. So we have to look at, are we looking at the right type of testing, and what, say, in Australia do we do?
That is exactly what I wanted to ask you. What do you do in Australia? Because I know that you do have pretty stringent standards for herbal quality, much more stringent than what we have here.
I think right around the world there are stringent standards. So let's not say that Australia's got better standards than the US, but let's put it that we have a different way of looking at it, because in Australia they're included as pharmaceutical medications and called natural therapy, drugs, if you like, or complementary medicine. But they come under the same standards as, say, someone making an antibiotic under a good manufacturing process and testing and so on. But if I look at, and rather than just pull it out of me, I'll actually mention from the Department of Health Therapeutic Goods Administration standards on herbal medicine, excluding extracts, and I can do extracts as well, is a number of tests: microscopic, macroscopic, chromatography, which is normally high-pressure liquid chromatography, and chemical reactions to ascertain, is that herb, or does that herb contain the agreed specifics that's mentioned in the British Pharmacopoeia. Now, theoretically, someone from these companies should go to their supplier and look at what they've bought and say, yep, that's definitely ginkgo based on all of the studies. Then look at it going to the processing thing and say, yes, they have. In other words, a qualified, reputable person is going to guarantee the chain of events from the raw ginkgo right through to the end product. And the chances then of there being any misrepresentation is greatly reduced.
So in summing up this research that has been conducted by the New York Attorney General's office, the message to Americans from an Australian herbalist expert would be, should we be concerned about these extracts that have been tested and no DNA found, or are there better tests that need to be done?
I think we've always got to be concerned if we find something isn't up to scratch what it is, because we've got to keep manufacturers right across the world on track to make sure they're supplying us with the best product in any product, whether it be pharmaceutical, drug, or herbal product. So therefore, we look at that. But when we've looked at this particular study, and I can pull out a lot of information to say that in fact is not the appropriate study for identification of certain herbs. It certainly would be if we had a raw herbal product, not a problem at all, but when it's highly processed, not. So I think the message out there is, I'd say that the manufacturers, the reputable manufacturers, are doing their best to ensure that people are getting the best product. I think the testing that they've put in the papers and said it's all rubbish is in fact not the ideal test. It is not an accurate test, and I don't think we can say that the amount of products that don't have the active ingredients is in fact not true. Their findings that they found a bit of soy and so on is absolutely understandable, because that's often used as a filler. I think it's a storm in a teacup, and I think they need to look at putting in something where following the chain of the herb right through, where someone can come up and say, here's the paper, it came from that tree, and it ends up in that bottle, and here's something to prove the fingerprint. And I think so more testing of a different type is absolutely needed.
Dr. Russell Sutright, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure, and all the very best, Joe and Terry.
You've been listening to Dr. Russell Sutright. He's a naturopath, a medical herbalist, an acupuncturist, and an educator in advanced life support, first aid, emergency care, and rescue. His books include The Handbook of Preventive Medicine with Dr. Florence and Get Well, an A to Z of natural medicine for everyday illness. His website is lifesurvival.com.au. He joined us from Glenmore Park, New South Wales, Australia.
And he was, of course, at home, as you could hear his dogs in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do have very different standards in Australia. You know, what drives me crazy, okay, rant alert, but why is it we have no oversight in this country for herbs, vitamins, minerals, dietary supplements of any kind? I mean, the FDA basically, my words, asleep at the switch. They don't think it merits their time or their resources, that's really sad, in my opinion.
Well, Joe, the American public pretty much told the FDA they didn't want them meddling with dietary supplements back in 1994 when Congress got more mail about that issue than any other.
But it's a Wild West show out there. I mean, there is nobody guarding the shop, and that scares me.
Well, you know, we frequently do hear from listeners who prefer a natural approach to treating a health condition. Have you tried an herbal medicine or a dietary supplement for a problem you had? How do you decide what to buy? We'd like you to tell us about your experience at 888-472-3366 or send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. And you can also reach us by way of Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. We go to Bradenton, Florida. Amy, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Please tell us your story.
Oh, hi, Terry and Joe. I'm so happy to be on your show. I love your show. My issue was that I had shortness of breath, and I had been checked for a number of different conditions. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. I did some Google research, found that magnesium had helped some people. Talked to my doctor. She said, take it. Didn't tell me that there would be side effects. And shortly after I started taking it, my breathing did seem to be better. But I found that I had embarrassing urgency problems.
Diarrhea.
Yes.
Yes.
And I had no idea what was going on, and I have a history of colon cancer in my family, so I was petrified. And I went back to the doctor and talked to her, and she said, well, of course, this is what they give you for a colonoscopy before you No, I didn't.
Yeah, well, you know what, Amy? I mean, again, this is one of the problems because a lot depends on the dose of magnesium. A lot of people do just fine if they take 100 or 200 milligrams, maybe even as much as 300 to 400 milligrams. But a big dose of magnesium can send you running to the bathroom, and sometimes you don't make it in time. And it's really embarrassing.
It was awful. Now, I have a question. So I went to a health food store after this all happened, and a gentleman there recommended a spray, which said it absorbs differently and shouldn't have the same. I have it. It makes my skin itch, but I'm scared to use it.
Yeah, if it makes your skin itch, I don't think you should use it, Amy. So thanks for your call. We really appreciate your story.
But again, some of the problems, Terry, with dietary supplements and even something as simple as magnesium is if the dose isn't right or if there aren't clear instructions, you can get into trouble.
Exactly right.
Where to next?
Well, I think we need to go to Clearwater, Florida. Jackie, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hi, Joe and Terry. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to talk about the supplement L-tryptophan. My mother had contracted EMS, which stands for, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, eosinophilia myalgia syndrome.
Right.
From a tryptophan that was from a Japanese manufacturer. The product was off the market for a while, and it's now available again. It's not being allowed to be imported. Because of this whole thing. Apparently they used bioengineered bacteria to produce it, and that was the issue. But my mother had permanent disability from it. People died from it. And now that L-tryptophan is back on the market, I'm wondering, does the government do anything to oversee the production of supplements like this to make sure that nothing like this can happen again to the American public? And I'd like your comments on that.
Well, Jackie, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I remember this story. It was a tragic one. It's, 15, maybe almost 20
almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, it went way back. And what had happened was people were taking L-tryptophan as sort of a sleeping pill and were reporting good results. And then along came this Japanese company, and they used, as you say, a biofermentation process to make the L-tryptophan, and a lot of people became very sick, and as you said, some people died from eosinophilia myalgia syndrome. I can't give you assurance that the Food and Drug Administration is monitoring the L-tryptophan that is back and making sure that it's up to quality. So it would make me nervous. Sorry, I don't have reassurance for you.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm just concerned that and other, especially with the proliferation of these types of manufacturing processes that this isn't going to happen to other people. And by the way, I work in the pharmacy industry, so
okay.
When people ask me, like, should I get this or what is this used for? I make sure to let them know that it is. This is what the manufacturer says it does. It's not evaluated or overseen by the FDA.
Well, as you have pointed out, there's a huge difference between the standards that the pharmaceutical industry has to go through and the standards the dietary supplement industry has to go through. And for my money, that's outrageous. Thank you so much for the call, Jackie.
Thank you for taking my call.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Joe, we've got an email from Julie in Front Royal, Virginia. She says, I was diagnosed with lead poisoning last year. It turned out it came from the Ayurvedic herbal supplements I had been taking daily since the early 1990s. My husband is a scientist, and he had the supplements tested in a mass spectrometer. That's the kind of thing that Dr. Kuberman was talking about. To our horror, there were significant lead spikes. We all need to be extra cautious about supplements that are manufactured in countries like India or China, where the soil may be contaminated. Herbs may be grown in contaminated soil, or the herbs may contain some clay to hold it together, and that clay could be contaminated. I could have died if we had not identified the source of the lead.
Wow. That's an amazing story. Let's go to, can't make up my mind.
All right, Joe.
You choose.
Go to Charlotte in Wiley, Texas.
Hi, Charlotte. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. We just have a minute before the break.
Hi, Joe and Terry. How are you this morning?
We're doing well. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to let you know that about 5 years ago, I was so crippled with rheumatoid arthritis that they were wanting to put me on methotrexate, and I just thought that the cure was worse than the disease. And I was introduced to a multivitamin supplement that I took, supplementation, which was like total nutrition twice a day. And within 3 weeks, started to become pain-free, and I'm now medication-free 5 years later. I'm still, and feel great and have no symptoms or indications.
Charlotte, that is an amazing story. I'm glad you shared it with us. I am going to say that you might be kind of unique. A lot of people with rheumatoid arthritis wouldn't respond quite so well, but that is great.
Well, the amazing thing about rheumatoid arthritis is that when it hurts. Right, Charlotte?
Absolutely.
And, if you have a hard time exercising or enjoying the activities of, life, and then all of a sudden they get better because you were taking a supplement, I'd say there's reason to believe that you got benefit from it. And we're not against supplements. We're just against the way in which they're manufactured. Thanks so much for the call, Charlotte. We do need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about dietary supplements, home remedies, and we'll review some good news on dietary approaches to staying healthy. If you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call, 888-472-3366. Email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions helping dry, cracked skin feel utterly soft and smooth. The number 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
You can purchase a CD of the show. Just call 800-732-2334. Today's show, number 985. Find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we are talking about the stories behind the health headlines, and we're interested in the natural approaches you've used to treat health problems. To join our conversation, You can call that's 888-472-3366. Email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or send a message through Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Join the conversation, 888-472-3366.
Jean in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. What's this about vinegar?
It's a great story, and I can validate it with strong evidence. Well, back in November, I thought I'm going to have my annual physical in January, and my cholesterol has always been on the high side, and it's probably going to be that way again. So I remembered what you had said about taking unfiltered vinegar as a possible cholesterol aid, and I began taking 2 tablespoons in a big glass of water religiously every morning. So I had my labs in mid-January and then sat down with my doctor the next week, and he was sort of laughing and shaking his head, and he said, "What have you done to lower your cholesterol?" And he showed me my lab results, and I'll just give you a couple. My total cholesterol had gone from 281 to 216. My LDLs had gone from 164 down to 122. And that's still not perfect, but, I mean, after all, that's just 2 months of taking unfiltered vinegar. So what do you think?
I think it's amazing. Now, tell us exactly how you do this. It's unfiltered. Is it apple cider vinegar or any kind of vinegar?
Unfiltered apple cider, and I've found that, you do not have to go to a natural food store to buy it. You can buy it in your regular grocery store. And I just take 2 big tablespoons in a glass of water. And it's a little bit difficult to swallow, and I don't like artificial sweeteners, but I do put in a little bit of that just to take the edge off. So that's it. It's that simple. And, it's such a miracle because if you have high cholesterol, you don't wake up one morning and say, "Oh, I think my cholesterol's down 20 points. You don't know. But when you can see it on a laboratory result trends printout, it's pretty dramatic.
Oh, Jean, this is such a great story. And we have heard from people in the past who've said, I think that taking vinegar will lower my cholesterol. But we've never had the kind of proof that you have just offered.
And the other thing that's so cool about this, Jean, the cost of a bottle of apple cider vinegar compared to the cost of, let's say, Crestor, it's like night and day. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us on the People's Pharmacy.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye. And, Terry, we've also heard that vinegar can help control blood sugar, especially after a meal. So if you have a vinaigrette dressing on your salad, like the French do.
Yes, just don't eat dessert. Go with the salad last, and that can help keep your triglycerides down, and that may also help the cholesterol. Let's keep talking about cholesterol. Karen in Seagoville, Texas, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Good morning, Terry and Joe. I'm a new caller, and I also had high cholesterol. And then, of course, the doctor wanted to put me on Crestor, and I said, no, there's too many side effects. So I started taking niacin, and I started taking this cholesterol off that comes out of Walmart. And also he said, only eat fried chicken once a month and only eat ice cream once a month, which is hard for me to do, but I've really tried to stick with it. And my cholesterol came down, and now they're saying that the high cholesterol isn't that big a problem. So what's the story?
Well, it's a great question because, for years, doctors were told there are targets. You need to get people's LDL cholesterol, that's the bad stuff, below 135. And then they changed that and it had to be below 100. And then some cardiologists said, actually, you need to get the LDL below 70, which is virtually impossible without a statin. And then along came the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology, and they said, well, there really wasn't very good evidence for those targets after all, and what you need is to use the risk calculator that we have created. And so everybody was supposed to go to this website and put in their numbers and see whether or not they needed to take a statin.
So we tried that out once that risk calculator went online, and we put in some people's numbers, and we discovered that an awful lot of people would be on a statin. An awful lot.
Well, virtually everybody
over 65.
It was based more on age. So you could be a marathon runner, a vegetarian. If your blood pressure was like 125 over 85, you would be told to take a statin, which makes no sense. So I think that most cardiologists would now say, those old targets, like you have to get your total cholesterol down below 200, you have to have your LDL below 100, that's gone.
So the question is Karen doing herself good by lowering her cholesterol with the niacin and the cholesterol? What does cholesterol have? I'm not quite sure.
I don't know. I can't honestly say. But, if it's working for you, Karen, and your doctor's happy with your numbers, then I'd say good on you, to quote the Australians.
Well, I'm 67, and I get up at 5, and I fall into bed at 12 exhausted. And I get up at 5 o'clock again because I run a farm. And I run around here like a chicken with my head cut off.
Well, it sounds like you've got plenty of energy, so that's a good thing.
I do. I take a handful of vitamins every day, and it's just various ones, but some of them I get at Walmart, some of them I get at Herbal. I'm just wondering, if they started doing testing on all these things and putting more restrictions on them, would it really hike the price of them?
Well, it's a good question, and it's not so much that I think we want the herbs and vitamins to be restricted. We just want to make sure that they are the quality that they're supposed to be. And right now, it's not clear that that's what's going on. Thank you so much for the call. We really appreciate it.
Joe, we've got an email from Marty in Plano, Texas, and Marty writes, I toured the manufacturing plants and quality assurance labs of a number of companies when I was president of the largest trade association for natural products. My advice to consumers is to stick with large, long-established companies because they not only have a reputation to maintain, but they also have the funds to do thorough testing. The batches of raw material that they reject from their suppliers are still sold by others, such as fly-by-night, online companies, and deep discounters. I wrote a small book on aloe vera and can confirm what Consumer Labs said about quality. USA-made products are good. Chinese imports are the biggest problem. I found that the most popular product made in Texas, Lily of the Desert, had the richest content of polysaccharides. I think that's a good thing.
We hope so. Speaking of pharmaceutical experience, we go to Fonda in Tampa, Florida. Hi, Fonda. Tell us your story.
Hi, Joe and Terry. I, years ago, worked quite a few years in a laboratory, pharmaceutical and nutritional laboratory and manufacturing plant, and I can attest to the rigorous testing that is done daily on every product that would come into the plant, and I agree with the last email that you read about the person who is inspecting various plants. I would stick with well-known brands.
Mm-hmm.
Well, absolutely.
And, I certainly would not I personally would not buy anything from China.
Well, the other problem with that, Fonda, is that a lot of our pharmaceuticals now come from China, and we don't have any way of knowing. Thank you so much for your call. We're going to go to Coon Valley, Wisconsin. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hi, Joe and Terry. I got actually a supplement and a home remedy
okay.
thing to tell you about. Well, I used to be a dairy farmer, and I had developed some pretty severe knee pain. And at the same time, I actually started coaching my daughter's volleyball team. And it was to the point where I could hardly move around, and I started taking glucosamine chondroitin.
Uh-huh.
And after a few weeks, the pain was gone, and it has never returned. I still take it regularly.
Mike, do you have a
don't know.
specific brand that you like to take?
I take it's Simply Right from Sam's Club. It's
Okay.
basically the cheapest, and it works for me. And I'm still very active, and I haven't had a reoccurrence of knee pain as long as I've been on it.
We are so pleased to hear that.
Well, it's what's so confusing about this, Mike, is that the U.S. double-blind placebo-controlled trials basically say glucosamine and chondroitin worthless.
They're no better than placebo. And the problem is that several European trials have shown benefit, like you're reporting, Mike, from glucosamine and chondroitin. So we're left with kind of a puzzle. What's different about the European trials from the American trials? And then let's throw in the dogs and the horses, because veterinarians also use glucosamine and chondroitin, and it seems to help the animals move better. Now, animals can't tell us if they hurt, but they do tell us by limping.
It seems relatively safe, and the best test is, did it work? And in your case, Mike, it worked. Now, would you also share your home remedy, please?
Yeah, I've always suffered from leg cramps, occasional leg cramps, and I always hear the yellow mustard story on the People's Pharmacy, and so I picked up a bottle, and actually it happened twice in the last 2 weeks where I got just a simple Charlie horse. And then the other night I had probably the worst cramp I've ever had in my life, where it pretty much encircled my whole thigh. And upon taking a couple tablespoons of yellow mustard, within 2 minutes they were gone, and they never came back.
Oh, we love hearing that. And that has been our experience as well. Yellow mustard gets rid of muscle cramps very quickly.
And because you do a lot of karate exercises, sometimes in the evening.
I sometimes do get muscle cramps for sure. And the yellow mustard, it's great.
Now, Terry, a little while ago, we were talking about cholesterol. And do you remember for years and years and years we were told no eggs?
Oh, yeah. Stay away from the eggs because they're high in cholesterol. They're going to raise your cholesterol, which didn't turn out to be true.
No, but there was still a question about diabetes.
Right, because when they did the research to say, oh, you can eat eggs again, it's all right, the caveat was, but not if you have diabetes.
Right. Well, there's a new study out just from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And if I'm not mistaken, Terry, that's a really good journal, peer-reviewed, high quality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, this is really wonderful research because it's double-blind, randomized controlled trials, and that's what doctors love to see. 140 participants. They were randomized to one of two diets. In one diet, it was the high egg consumption diet. These were all, by the way, people with diabetes, type 2 diabetes. The high egg consumption was 2 eggs a day, at least 6 days a week, and this went on for 3 months. The low egg diet was less than 2 eggs a week. And then they looked at cholesterol. Well, guess what? No difference. Total cholesterol was the same. Low-density lipoprotein, the bad cholesterol, was the same. Triglycerides were the same. Blood sugar control was the same.
So, in other words, avoiding eggs doesn't get you anything.
Doesn't do anything. And by the way, the people who ate eggs, they felt fuller after breakfast.
Oh, I would think
Surprise.
I would think so. I think eggs make a great breakfast.
Now, there was also a study just this week that suggested an anti-seizure drug, levetiracetam, known by the brand name Keppra, might be good for the brain for people who are starting to have memory problems. It's very preliminary, but very exciting.
Well, we'll be watching that research. But here's some more research on brain science, Joe. Cocoa flavonoids.
That's chocolate.
Yeah, cocoa flavanols, the stuff from cocoa and chocolate, and cognition. It turns out this was a study, randomized, placebo-controlled, 8 weeks in Italy, 90 people, elderly people, that means over 64. And what they found was that the folks who got the high and the intermediate level flavanol supplement every day for 8 weeks did better on their cognitive function tests. They tested them at the beginning and at the end of those 8 weeks. So cocoa flavanols, good for your brain. Who knew? It's great.
Absolutely. Well, we've been boosting chocolate on the People's Pharmacy for decades.
Quite a long time. And by the way, If you want to know where to get your cocoa flavanols, consumerlab.com. We talked to Dr. Cooperman early in the show. Consumerlab.com did a very nice analysis of cocoa flavanol sources, pills and powders and all sorts of places you might be going for your cocoa flavanols. And you can find that on their website. You will have to pay for it. But I can tell you that Cocoa Via came out with the best controlled flavanol supplement, also free of lead and cadmium, which are worries with other cocoa powders.
Well, we actually have a question here from Nancy in Seminole, Florida. She says, is there a website she can check for the supplement she's taking because she is starting to experience some side effects? And the answer is there's really only one place. And this is not an advertisement. We have no relationship financially
with ConsumerLab.com. We do look there ourselves when we want to know this. And the trouble is they're the only ones who are doing that kind of testing. Consumer Reports does some testing, and you may be able to find some of your supplements from Consumer Reports. But either way, you'll have to become a member.
Right, and there's no relationship between ConsumerLab.com.
No, they are completely independent.
Right. Now, unfortunately, as we said, there is a charge, a monthly charge for access to the information at ConsumerLab.com. We also have a question from Darlene in Viola, Wisconsin. And Darlene says, more people die from pharmaceuticals than from supplements. The wrong ingredients often come from overseas. And, that's true for pharmaceuticals these days. A lot of the generic drugs that we rely on come from India and China and Thailand and Brazil and Mexico. And the FDA is trying to improve its oversight, but there's a lot that needs to be done. Terry, we have just about 30 seconds left. Do you have an email?
I do have an email from Rachel who says, until about a month ago, I was taking Centrum Silver 50 Plus Women's Formula. A few months ago, while taking this vitamin, I developed a terrible cough, plagued me all day long, so severe that my back and ribs got out of alignment. She finished the bottle of Centrum. She started taking a different brand, and the coughing went away. She figured out it was the color additives to make the Centrum Silver purple.
Interesting. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening to The People's Pharmacy. Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Sophie Copeland provided technical assistance. Al Wodarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by the inestimable B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Red-X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. 800-345-7339. Online, uttercream.com.
And when you go to the People's Pharmacy, you can find out about herbs, vitamins, all kinds of home remedies at peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening, and join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
If you want to feel more connected to humanity and a little less alone, listen to Beautiful Anonymous. Each week, I take a phone call from one random anonymous human being. There's over 400 episodes in our back catalog. You get to feel connected to all these different people all over the world. Recent episodes include one where a lady survived a murder attempt by her own son. But then the week before that, we just talked about Star Trek. It can be anything. It's unpredictable. It's raw. It's real. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.